And of course, we know that Tupac would kind of lead the way of that. But so crazy considering how Tupac started as a background dancer for Digital Underground, dancing, smiling, having a good time. And he came out of performing arts school doing ballet. And even when he first got into rap, he was making songs that were political and, were speaking to those different social issues. But there was absolutely nothing gangsta about Tupac. This was a day and night transformation. And so many people that were around Tupac regularly have come out and said that this gangsta image that he was putting out there was not even close to who he really was.
I used to play at a place called Hollywood Athletic Club a lot. And that's where, I forgot how I first met Tupac. But Tupac and I would play, and we every now and then would meet up there. And what was interesting is that it felt like, from my perspective, it was a kind of a weird thing with Tupac. Like, we would play, and people would say, your friend looks a lot like Tupac. But nobody ever thought it was him, because the side of him that I knew was so different from what the whole gangster thing. Because I speak the way I speak, no matter who I'm with, right? And so people would be like, oh, that guy's not Tupac. Tupac's not that goofy. But then, like, we would be playing, and all of a sudden he'd go back into, yeah, nigga, I'm gonna. And I'm like, somebody black must have walked into the room. Yep, there it is. Yep. It was kind of like he would turn that on and off. It was like, I say it's like, imagine if Al Pacino kept in Scarface mode for the purposes of other people around him.
Now, obviously, you mentioned it was a special time, and you had a special relationship with Tupac. Talk about that.
Yeah, man. Me and Pac had a great relationship. You know what was great about Pac? Everybody think he was like this thug, this gangster. First of all, he was too, like, he's a performing arts high school kid. Okay, Pac was very smart, and he was very silly. He was a clown, and he wasn't a real gangster, but he act gangster, and he's method actor. So he went a little bit too far, and he's like, "Oh, I'll shoot you!" Pow! He really shoot you. Yeah. So he overcommit. But I could tell he wasn't a gangster because he had the softest hands you ever wanted to like touch on a man. Like, no gangster has hands like it's hard.
He was moisturizing them.
No, it was like I call him a Palmolive thug. Like he put it, come here, you want some of this? And he just give you this gentle hand. It was soft, and then he had these long eyelashes, looked like Snuffleupagus. Just like, you don't want none of this. I'm a dog. But he sold the role, though. He did.
A lot of people tell me Tupac is, for the most part, a nice guy. This old thug thing, hype. Good for record sales. Helps him identify with the young people who are out there and angry, who would maybe label him a sellout, like they did Hammer, if he didn't have that hard side. What about that?
First of all, nobody could call me a sellout. I'm not going for that. I'm not even in that. I'm not looking for approval from the black community, because we don't give approval. We don't really do nothing but exist. So it's not like black people could tell me you a sellout or you true blue.
I'm play devil's advocate again.
Right.
Critics say, yeah, but you're being pimped. You're being pimped by the record executives who will allow you to do your thug life because it portrays a certain black. I mean, you've heard it, that if you were just a singer, you wouldn't have the same record contracts you have.
Right.
But because you portray the thug life, the gangster rap, they've allowed you to make that money. They've allowed you to push and make your platinum.
I beg to differ. You know what I'm saying? I'm getting pimped. That's true. But just like how a woman would be, you know what I'm saying? Anybody to be pimped. It's like, it's not that you get pimped, it's how long you get pimped. You know what I'm saying? Because if you really look at this situation, it is not I who's being pimped. When you look at them white kids with Raiders hats on, it's the white folks getting pimped. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm making their future. I'm writing down their curriculum. Right now, what I write in my album today, when it comes out in 2 months, that's what white kids is doing. So who really is getting pimped? What I'm writing in my raps is what them white kids is gonna be saying to their mamas and daddies when they come home. Who is getting pimped?
It just seems like Tupac was placed into that position to help to continue to further push gangster rap into mainstream. And it's hard not to think that it's not something more than a coincidence that his very last album has him nailed to a cross, and he's pushed as the ultimate hip hop martyr. who died as a thug. And, that legacy just continues to live on. While the people that really laid the foundation for hip hop have pretty much been completely forgotten, almost like they've been erased, which has ultimately erased those original 4 elements of hip hop. And now those 4 elements have become sex, money, guns, drugs, everything that NWA and 2 Live Crew originally ushered in, everything that the mainstream media was supposedly so against is now literally what mainstream hip hop is. And by the time we hit the mid 90s, the entire hip hop scene had been permeated with so much of this gangster rap that it was to the point that if you didn't have that hardcore gangster element to your rap style, that your music wasn't even getting played. The entire hip hop scene just had this dark element to it from the mid 90s all the way up to the year 2000. Even the artists that were putting out that positive hip hop in the early 90s and 80s were trying to adapt to have more of a gangster image. Even if their messages didn't change, it's like they were still forced to change their image just to survive in this gangster rap dominated climate. But when it came down to it, it wasn't just your image. If your lyrics didn't have those gangster elements, it was all about pushing this gangster rap to the masses. We still had a few groups that would push through, like Arrested Development and a couple of others, but it was just never like it was in the past. Things did start to lighten up after the early 90s, but even when the music was just fun and party oriented, you could still see the effects of gangster rap on all the music that came after it. It might be a song with a lighthearted beat, something made for the radio, made for the clubs. But then you look past the beat and actually listen to the lyrics, and they're still focusing in on all the same stuff that gangster rap ushered in. Guns, drugs, disrespecting women, glorifying that materialistic mindset, putting the pursuit of money over pretty much everything, just over a less hardcore beat. Now you could actually dance to all that negativity. And we did have conscious hip hop in the mainstream around this time in the early to mid 2000s. Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Lauryn Hill, Common, The Roots, even Lupe Fiasco a little later on. But it just wasn't like that conscious hip hop of the 80s. In the 80s, you had this conscious hip hop where the only thing really separating this music from anything else was the message. This was music you could play at a club, at a party. And again, the only major difference was the lyrics and the message. But once we got into the 2000s, it was like that conscious music was being deliberately watered down. And you put it up against the other hip hop that was going mainstream at the time, that's sticking to the guns, drugs, violence. You're getting all these innovative, energetic tracks with these instrumentals that pull you in. But for the conscious hip hop, we're getting this low energy, mundane sound. Almost like they were trying to intentionally make those conscious messages less interesting, less enticing. And eventually it just got to the point where there was just no more conscious hip hop in the mainstream at all. We still had Nas, Kanye West, Wale, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, but they were all coming, with that little bit of positivity and a whole lot of nonsense. They're giving you all these mixed messages. Nobody is standing firm on any higher principles, higher virtues, higher consciousness. The flow is good, but every other word is explicit, staying on that low vibration. And for the most part, there's nothing about what they're saying that's speaking to your higher self. There's not a whole lot about it that's separating it from the rest of the mainstream hip hop. And it's gotten to the point where what is dominating hip hop now is the guns, the drugs, that drill and trap hip hop, which is ushering in this culture of death. And they're telling you exactly how they're killing people and telling you exactly what drugs they're using and giving you the exact formula for how they're mixing the drugs. And again, you look into who is financially backing this and who is giving these artists a platform. And everything traces back to Sony, Warner, and Universal funding and financing this music. And because this is where the money's going, this is the type of hip hop that these major labels are financing. You now have all the independent artists flooding social media with more of the same type of hip hop because it seems like that's the way to get on, to get noticed by these major labels. And where hip hop music is now all stems back to gangster rap being introduced in the 80s. And just by coincidence, we got the first private prison in 1984, which led into thousands of private prisons by the late 80s. And you can see the number of people entering prisons has continually increased from 1985 all the way to right now. Now, we already know that the prison industrial complex is one of the most lucrative businesses. But once the private prisons came into play in the 80s, you now had private investors who were financially invested in these prisons. And those investments depend on these prisons staying operational and staying filled. And these private companies that own these prisons are actually contracted out by the government. So these private companies are basically government contractors that have to meet certain guidelines laid out by the government in order to maintain ownership of these prisons. And a lot of these government contracts with these private prisons require a 90 to 100% occupancy rate, meaning that they need to have these prisons filled 90 to 100% with prisoners. So you got people whose investments literally depend on these prisons being operational and depend on them being filled to the max or near the max. So now the prison industrial complex has basically become like a service industry, because now we have that factor of supply and demand. And you got BlackRock and Vanguard, the two biggest investors in private prisons. It's about $200 billion invested into these private prisons between the two of these companies. So we're talking about more than 50% of investments into private prisons links back to these two companies. And then these two companies, BlackRock and Vanguard, also have billions of dollars invested into Sony, Warner, and Universal. So the same companies that are investing billions of dollars into these private prisons are also investing billions of dollars into these three major corporations that are financing gangsta rap, and is now financing the trap and the drill music that pushes and promotes everything that leads people into the prisons. So it's like they knocked out two birds with one stone. You remove the positive, conscious hip hop from the mainstream, and then you feed people their own destruction while also financially benefiting off of it. They understood the power of the music and the influence it was having and the potential of where it was going. And they knew hip hop was not slowing down. So they flipped it and turned it against the masses. But as that shift in hip hop was happening, there was so many people that saw what was happening and were trying to fight against the shift in this music. You know, it wasn't just like everybody was accepting it. A lot of people saw right through this thing and were trying to call it out. Calvin Butts, C. Dolores Tucker, Dionne Warwick. We had a lot of people protesting the music, passionately protesting the music, to the point where they were even driving steamrollers over the top of gangster rap albums. And even when we still had local black radio stations, before radio was taken over by the major corporations, you had so many radio stations refusing to play gangster rap because they saw the writing on the wall. They saw that we were being fed our own destruction.
We will not stand for the vile, ugly, low, crime, abusive, and rough music.
I'm here because I'm outraged at the denigration of black women. And as a father, as a son, my mother, my sisters, our wives, our girlfriends have been denigrated, and these are against the values of our community.
Reverend Butts argues that he is not against all rap, just that which denigrates blacks through words and images. That rap, he says, casts a shadow on all blacks.
This is not a place, as one young woman stood up and said once, where I hear people being called bitches and whores around every corner and MFs. It's not. It's not like that in Oakland. It's not like that in LA. There is some of it, but the world must not understand that that is who we are. We are not that.
It is not all right for our black male children to grow up and be drug dealers, gang bashers, or stick-up kids. But your negative lyrics and videos are telling them that it's all right. Negative rap is a slap in our faces. It lets everybody know to a certain extent that we as black people must have low self-esteem, no respect for ourselves or anyone else, and we just don't care who we hurt as long as we're making the dollar.
Hopes that protests like these and the media coverage they generate will eventually make an impression on the rappers and cause them to change their negative vocabulary.
We're not saying that they can't make it. They have every right in the world to make it. What we're saying is that we hope to create a climate in our community that we believe once existed, where this kind of thing is so intolerable that people would dare not suggest that a black woman is a bitch or any woman is a female dog.
The leading black radio station in New York, WBLS, recently announced that it will not be playing music containing derogatory, profane, or violent lyrics. The station's general manager is Dave Lampel. I talked with him recently about his station's decision. Tell us why WBLS decided to take gangsta rap off the air.
The words, the way people were talking about women, talking about violence and using guns as a method of everyday life. And unfortunately, this was impregnated throughout a lot of the music that was coming out, even some of the most popular stuff. Artists who didn't have to do it were starting now to do this as a regular routine.
And was it some kind of studies you had seen, or was it discussions within the organization or reaction from the community? What motivated it?
People just got so frustrated with the fact that more and more records were coming out with this. Our choices as to what to play on the air and put on the air were fewer and fewer and fewer. And the feeling was, you know, since we had become a company that led the way in black ownership and broadcasting, we led the way on several important policy fights in Washington at the FCC and other areas, that it's time for us to also lead the way and issue a statement of policy about internally how we are going to deal with this onslaught of music, if you will, and also, more importantly, use this as kind of a bully pulpit to the industry to say, hey, look, we are a principal operator in this business, and we want it to stop.
Is it because there's something you discern welling up in the community? We
got a lot of letters from listeners who would talk about what's on BET or on the videos and music television. We got critical about the kind of words to express some of the things in ways that we may not be so comfortable with. I'm not sure that it means that a public radio station like WBLS has to be the conveyor of that. I mean, people can buy this product, they can hear it, they can see it in a lot of other ways. We're not trying to say that the product should never be out there. We're simply saying we're not going to play the game of somehow implying that this is mass public appeal acceptable stuff, that the concept of calling somebody niggers and bitches and hoes and all these kinds of words are typical routine ways that people should be talking with one another. When I was a kid growing up in Harlem, to say something about your mother or to say something about your sister, just even if it was something halfway off the wall, would have gotten you slaughtered. Today we have people walking around calling women and putting their hands on women and degrading them and beating them and shooting them and all kinds of other things. And it's almost like this is a new factor in my community.
Is it more than just taking the music off of your air? Are you on a campaign? Are you lobbying other stations to follow your lead?
Lots of other stations have already gotten in touch with us. I mean, obviously, our chairman, Pierre Sutton, is president of the National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters. That is an organization that at its next meeting, as they have at past meetings, will increase their stand on this. There are a lot of other black stations that have already stated policies of different types, and hopefully there will be a unity of all those policies. A lot of non-black stations have already contacted us to ask the details of how we're doing this and have subscribed personally themselves to the same policy. I think it's not a question of popularity, it's a question of right or wrong.
African American women particularly are tired of being called hoes, bitches, and sluts by our children who are paid to do this by Time Warner.
I am here to put the nation on notice that violence perpetuated against women through the music industry in the forms of gangsta rap and misogynist lyrics will not be tolerated any longer. Principle must come before profit. A year ago, I established the National Political Congress of Black Women's Entertainment Commission, headed by Dionne Warwick, Melba Moore. Thus, images that degrade our dignity and are an insult to our children, our families, and communities concern us too. And that includes all this gangster rap and misogynist lyrics. Music that glorifies and promotes violence with guns, knives, or drugs, and denigrates and defames women. For 400 years, profit came before principle, as black women bore the brunt of slave masters' degradation. The spirit of black women and their families could not be broken. Today, however, through the lyrics of rappers who display no respect for women, no respect for families, and little respect for themselves, the souls of our sisters are being destroyed, and so too their progeny. All of us have watched as the industry have grown. We have watched not really knowing, not really understanding, not first realizing the damage that is inherent in what some thought were merely words. Now we see the direct and indirect effects. We see the rise in murders, in abuse, in batterings. We hear the wailing mothers, the grieving sisters, the tormented brothers and fathers and children planning their own funerals. We feel their hopelessness and helplessness, and we embrace their pain. Yet in the midst of these tragedies, others still want to argue about the First Amendment right to freedom of speech, a freedom they have embraced to call African American women hoes and bitches and sluts and even worse. As I see it, there are three things wrong with gangster rap and misogynist lyrics. It is obscene, it is obscene, it is obscene. In my view, it was never intended by the founding fathers of this nation that First Amendment rights were meant to protect obscenities. Obscenity has long been an exception to free speech. If the filth that is portrayed in these gangster rap videos and art is not obscene, then I submit that nothing is obscene. African American women have always been the protector and nurturers of their homes, their families, and their communities. We march for our rights to Selma. I was there with Dr. King. We're beaten with billy clubs, and we're bitten with dogs unleashed by bull counters. We will not tolerate injustice and insults from our worst enemies then, and we sure ain't gonna accept insults from our youth now. I stand before you today with millions of my sisters to say that no one has the right to degrade, denigrate, dishonor, or disrespect African American women. No one has the right to poison our children's mind and destroy our African cultural heritage. That is why the women of NPCBW and our supporters will demonstrate. We'll go to jail again and again and again, just as we did when we demonstrated at the Wiz in December and Sam Goody yesterday. No one and no industry will be allowed to continue this social and psychological genocide of the women and girls of this nation. Stand before you today with the spirits of Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Mary McLeod Bethune to say this: we will defy any force that will disrespect us and our families, and I apologize, Mary Berry, my good friend and founder.
Have you been disappointed that there have not been more members of the African American community, particularly leaders in the African American community, who've been willing to be on the front lines with you about rap music?
That has just, you know, that has hurt me more than all that white folks have done to me. You know, that has hurt me more because our people don't really understand the effect that this is going to have on our people. Because we're going to be gone. Those of us who've been the fighters, And I'm glad you're recording this history, because all of us are going to be gone. Just like we didn't know about what took place in the latter part of the 18th century. You see, 1800s. That was all of it. Now that we had congresspersons, now we had legislators rather, writing the Constitution of the state Constitution of Georgia and South Carolina. They were there, legislature. We don't know about that. They wrote out, and our kids coming up in 2040 and 50 and 60 will not know about us. And they're going to wipe it away. And the kids, that's why they're recording it. All this music, that's all our kids will be hearing in 2020, 25 and 30 and 40. 2040 and 50, and they'll have to start fighting. Those who are knowledgeable now will have to start the whole civil rights movement again. Those who fail to learn the lessons of history are what? Doomed to repeat them.